All right, today I figured I'd take you along. It's a beautiful Saturday, it's windy, and what I'm going to do today is my seasonal maintenance on my air conditioner, or actually my heat pump. So I'm going to go through the cooling maintenance procedure, and what I wanted to show you is, first off, this is the coil cleaner that I'm going to use. It's called a Triple D. It's made by Thermostat. I'm sure you can find it most anywhere, especially if you're, a technician or some type of involvement in the heating and air field already. So any parts supplier would have your coil cleaners available that you would use. This is my particular one. It is non-acidic, very friendly. It's got a pleasant smell, and on the back, if you read, or actually on the side I should say, if you read the instructions, then it'll tell you that you can mix it for evaporators and condenser coils. So that's, for me, instead of buying 2 jugs of cleaner of different types, different smells, then I just buy one. So it's more of a detergent than anything. I don't go around pressure washing coils. I don't scrape too many, get the dirt off. Most people, it's been a while since I've seen one like that. But anyway, mine's fairly clean because I try to take care of mine. It is a train unit. It's got the spiny coil outside. So we're going to walk through, and I'm going to use this coil cleaner on it. Another thing I'd like to show you is the coil gun that I use. Many different types out there. I've had this one for years. It's, you can see right there, it says coil gun. It's made by New Calgon. They're another brand for the heating and air. It's got on the top, let's see if I can get you in right here. On the top, it's got a selectable dial, and on the back of this, it'll tell you what each dial is, and it'll give you the ratio. So if you read the back of your coil cleaner and get the right mix for what you're going to do, like I said, this one is a condenser and an evaporator. I think it's 1:6 on the condenser coil and 1:10 on the evaporator. So I'm going to mix this 1:6. I'm going to use it outside. I would use it inside. However, this one's made to connect to a water hose, so it comes with a nozzle, and you would it's got the quick detachable end here, foaming tip on it, or it's got a spray tip. It's made for heating and air use, or for chemical use, I should say. But I don't, oh Lord, my bad, I don't spray my evaporator coil because I've got a coating on it, and I'll show you the sticker in a little bit. I've also got a couple UV lights when we get up to the attic, so you'll see a point in here where I remove my little inspection port, a little sheet metal, like a 10x10 or a 12x12 piece of metal that I've insulated on the back. I look at the return side of my evaporator coil. I have UV lights. I've got better filters than most. I've done a video on those filters that I use. I actually brought them into the shop and did a short segment on it. But my filters are fairly clean. They do a real good job of keeping dirt out of my ductwork. And I don't really spray my coil with anything because it'll take that coating that I have on there off. So special deal, maybe one day we'll get to that. So I'm pretty much just going to clean my condenser today. But like I said, I use the Triple D, the Versatech product. Last me a couple seasons or whatnot, and I'm going to mix it up into this coil gun. So other than that, let's go through the steps. This is how I would do maintenance if I was still out in the field every day running calls. And this is pretty much how I do my own, except there's no check owed at the end.
So the first step is the most important. You want to make sure that you arrive to the call on time, whether it's 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock. Make sure that you greet the customer, and when you do, that you look presentable. No funky BO or bad breath or hair out of whack. Make sure you don't have crumbs in your beard from lunch. So ring the doorbell, shake their hand if possible, bring their newspaper to them if you walk over it in the driveway, and try to present them with a business card. This will leave a lasting impression. Now, you can spend a few minutes talking with the customer about the weather and the garden and the kids since the last time you've seen them. But if you're unfamiliar with the home, you need to ask the customer where the thermostat's located. You need to get to the thermostat, because usually by the thermostat there's the filter as well. And what I like to do is make sure the unit is in cool mode, and I'm going to turn the temperature down 10 degrees. That helps me. It's an easy number to remember because later I'm going to turn it back up 10 degrees to put it where they originally had the setting. This way that they're not inconvenienced. And while we're there, we want to take a look at the filter to make sure there's not any obstruction, to make sure that the filter has been replaced at least on a regular interval. If not, we need to address that and change it for them if possible. So now that we've got the thermostat set and we've checked the filter, I like to start on the outside unit personally. This is my house, my unit. I know it's not very dirty, and I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to wash the coil outside first, but I'm going to go outside and start my basic refrigerant checks and electrical checks. So we always tell people to let the unit warm up a few minutes, and this is your chance. So you're going to you're going to exit the customer's house, and you're going to go back to your vehicle. You're going to grab your notepad, your pen, your tool bag with your gauges, your meter, everything that you think you need to start out a service call. And you're going to find the outdoor unit, whether it's a package or split or whatever. I've got a split unit, so we're going to do this in two pieces, basically outside and inside. But you'll see here, I don't use my set of gauges with hoses on it. I've got a kind of what I call a stubby set. And this allows for minimal refrigerant loss. If there's not an issue that I need to investigate further, then these gauges work fine for me. But I'm going to check high and low pressures. I'm going to check saturation temperatures, vapor line and liquid line temperatures so I can calculate superheat and subcooling. I'm going to write down model number, serial number. I'm going to get my amperage on my motors. I'm going to check my voltage in and out of my contactor, all the basics. So with everything done outside, now it's time to go inside. So we're going to find the indoor unit, the air handler. It can be in an attic, a crawl space, a customer's hallway. If you don't know where it's at, all you have to do is ask. So once I finally make my way up in the attic, there's one thing that I like to keep in mind. I adjusted the thermostat. I let it run while I got my tools. It ran the whole time I was doing my checks. So the unit should be kind of stabilized as far as capacity and things like that. So the first thing I like to start with when I get to the indoor unit is air temperatures. I go ahead and take my return and supply temperatures. But with the thermometer I have, it's not an instant reading. So it takes a second. I start with the return and I just wait a few minutes. So while I'm waiting, I'm going to take a look around. I'm going to look at the ductwork, make sure there's nothing loose, hanging, torn. I'm going to look at the emergency overflow pan under the air handler if it has one. I'm going to make a note if there's water. That could indicate other problems. I'm going to look for torn insulation, drain line that's unlevel or not pitched downward. You're going to just look around for general problems that you could encounter. Make a note of those. If you see something like I don't know, dead squirrels or insulation that looks like it's been dug up from a dead squirrel, anything that's with the house, you're up there and the customer's not. So go ahead and take a minute and look for problems to identify and then inform them. So you're going to write down the return and supply so you can document that on the invoice later, and your mind should start turning around the fact of all the readings that you've taken. You should kind of have an idea of what the unit's performing like. So calculate the delta T, so on. Right now we're going to look at the blower. So really the last reading that we need to record is the blower amps. So I'm going to take the cover off. I should have flipped it around. By doing it the way you see here, I could have pulled the insulation loose from the back side. You want to make sure that you watch that. It's just the way it happens sometimes. So be careful with the blower door when you pull it off. But you need to isolate that compartment and get to the electrical side. So I'm going to check the amp draw, and what I'm looking for is a small amount of amps, probably 4 or 5 or so. But I don't want to see anything high because that could indicate that the heat strips are on. So now I'm going to check the capacitor for the blower in my case. I've got a PSC motor, so the capacitor needs to be checked. So I'm going to turn the main power off, and I'm going to go in there by the blower, and this one's kind of situated like a Goodman air handler sometimes. The capacitor is all the way in the back, so you just got to do it. So stick your hand back there, use your leads, pull one of the wires off, and check the capacitor to make sure it's good. Once I've got the readings done for the capacitor, I like to have a record written on the side of the blower wheel. It's my unit, it's just the way I do it, so you'll probably see it out in the field somewhere. Now, I didn't show you this to show you my capacitor. What we're focused on here is looking at the blower wheel and the blower motor itself. Look for buildup of dirt that can indicate poor filters and things of that nature. And at the same time, you can take a look to the right and look at the coil. So what you'll see here is I'm taking off an inspection plate. It's a common thing. You can get a piece of sheet metal, or if you've got a sheet metal shop at work, have them cut you up like a 10 by 10 or a 12 by 12, just piece of flat metal, and keep it on your van. You never know when you need to use it and cut into some ductwork. It's insulated on the back, so it doesn't, it seals very good and everything. But I've already looked at the front side of the coil, which is not the side we need to clean. I need to look at the back side of mine. So here you can see I've got a couple UV bulbs hanging out. I can easily look inside my return side and my bypass since I have a zone system. But what I'm doing on mine, since I have a coating on my coil, I'm more so looking for an inspection to make sure there's not anything caught there. I have seen customers that had long-haired dogs and very poor filters, and their unit's not working right. And when I get there, I have to cut an inspection hole and pull out just, pounds of dog hair. You got to make sure that you look at the right side of the coil. This is also the spot where we would spray it with cleaner if needed. You can use a pump up sprayer. I would not use the same sprayer that I use on the outdoor unit, but some type of little garden sprayer should work fine. So that was a little shot for the warning label for my UV lights. You don't want to have UV lights on while you're looking at them if the customer has them. It can mess with your eyes, just like getting a sunburn, okay? The other sticker at the top was for the coating that I sprayed on my coil. I had what they call a dirty sock syndrome, and I'm not paid advertisement or anything for these people, but that Vindex coating worked. I've been happy with it so far. So I'm going to put the cover back on and keep it moving. So now that the coil business is done, whether you've sprayed it because it needed it or pulled anything out of the return or what have you, in my case it was just an inspection. What you're seeing now is probably one of the most important things besides the cleaning is electrical connections. Make sure that if you have a terminal block inside your air handler like I do, you tighten those lugs, tighten those connections. You don't have to put a torque wrench on it or anything. You know when it's loose and you know when it's tight. So we're going to do it in the air handler, and then we're going to move up to the main disconnect, and we're also going to do that as well. Personally, I hate this disconnect that we have here. I prefer another T-handle style, but that's just personal preference. Whatever they have is what you deal with. Breakers or if it's fused or non-fused, it doesn't matter. So tighten those electrical connections. You can burn a house down. With that said, we put the cover back on and move on to the drain line. That's some more important business. So here you'll see the drain line. This is pretty much the last thing that I'll do is clean the drain line and maybe test the float switch if the float switch is there. Of course, we want to look at it and make sure that a float switch is on the overflow pan. And since they should be wired in series with the compressor or the power, we'll check it if we can. So what I'm doing now is basically I pull the clean out cap off of that primary drain. When they installed this, instead of running a regular 90-degree elbow on top of the P-trap, they put a T, and that gave me the option to have a clean out port basically. So part of the maintenance is making sure that that P-trap is clean, it's not clogged up, that can back up into the unit, overflow into the pan, and we've got all kind of problems. So I'll use my brush and some coil cleaner and water kind of mixed together to bust up all that dirt, and I'll use the the liquid there to of course flush that out. And what I'm looking for on the other end of this pipe, which is by the outdoor unit, I'm looking for a puddle of water to make sure that everything drained out. If you pour a gallon of water in that pipe and you go outside and the ground is dry, you probably got a problem somewhere. Maybe the PVC line has kind of warped due to the heat of the attic and it's not flowing right. but you have to investigate. So make sure the water comes out the other end. Now, with everything in the attic done, the drain line's clean, the electrical's been addressed, I'm going to ease out the attic and take my tools and everything with me. Make sure you turn the light out. Unless the customer specifically says leave the light on, you probably want to turn the light out. Nobody's up there to use it anyway, so turn it off and put the attic cover back on. And what I like to do, especially, I mean, being that this is my own house, once I get the attic cover on and I move the ladder out the way, I'm going to take a vacuum cleaner and I'm going to kind of vacuum the area that I'm in. If you had like a little dirt devil or something like that, you could do the same thing. We always knock insulation out of the attic when we're going in and out the scuttle hole. So make sure that if any little wood chips, if they had their roof redone, or any insulation that falls, don't just knock it off and leave it there. Kids might get it, what have you. So try to be good and clean up after yourself. So once we're done with the inside, I go outside and I'm checking the drain line to make sure that the water that I poured made it to the other end of the line. You should see a puddle of water, maybe some soapy water, bubbles, what have you. And once in my case, my son removed my PVC pipe extension to get the water away from my house. He removed it while he was cutting grass. So I put it back on just to keep the water draining further away from the house. So I'm going to turn the power off to the outdoor unit. I'm going to remove my little stubby gauges. I hate these disconnects, by the way. It's just, to me, they're kind of flimsy feeling, so much better ones out there. I'd prefer a fused disconnect. So now you see my gauges on there. Won't take but just a second, and they're off already. Look at that. So basically you're putting your tools up for that you've already used. I'm going to check the dual capacitor. I've got the power off, so I'm going to pull the wires off the Herm and the fan terminals. I'm going to check it out real quick. It should be a 45 and a 7.5. So I'm reading 45.3 and 7.53. So doing the check with the power off, everything is pretty much where it should be. I just replaced this. Excuse me, I just replaced this capacitor maybe last year. So I'm going to tighten the connections on the contactor, the line going in and the line going out. And Train likes to use some wire nuts, and you can see those toward the bottom area of the service panel, some kind of tan looking wire nuts that handle that larger gauge wire. And you can even see my outdoor thermostat there as well. So I record these readings for my capacitor just so I can see the trend from year to year. I record it on the inside panel. You can use like a fine or ultra fine Sharpie and do that. As long as you keep it neat, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem. So I'm going to fast forward through some of this next part because it's pretty much me pouring chemical or pouring that coil cleaner in the coil gun. And I'm going to start to clean the outdoor coil with the cleaner. And this is, the most messiest spot or part, I should say. And you have to watch it depending on the unit, and you'll learn with time and experience in the field. You should take the panels off. Grass clippings, pine straw, all that stuff gets in the outdoor unit, and it's part of the job is to get that stuff out. I've seen people with roots from nearby bushes that grow up into the unit. They didn't have their unit serviced on a regular, schedule, and it just had roots and vines all in the bottom of the compressor area. So here I'm just trying to struggle and get the panels off. On mine, it's not very dirty, and honestly, I couldn't get the panel off. So I don't want to sound hypocritical, but for me in this train, I kind of fought it for a few minutes, but I ended up just basically taking the fan wires, disconnecting it from the defrost board and from the capacitor and the contactor, and just popping the top on the fan. And this is also pretty standard stuff. So you can see here just the main service side where the reversing valve is what I'm working with. And if you were out in the field, you should at least look down in the compressor area and make sure that you don't have any pile up of leaves, pine straw, grass, things of that nature. So reach down in there, grab a handful, pull it out. Be careful, because in the southeast region, in the southeast region where we are, you might have some black widows, or everybody thinks about brown recluse when they go in a crawl space or something. But be careful. You don't know what's under there. You can wear some gloves. Doesn't have to be doesn't have to be leather gloves, but something just to protect you just in case. So let alone the little scratches, like paper cut scratches that you get from messing around with fins anyway. So once you clean it all out, you can start spraying the coil with the cleaner. And remember that airflow in the coil is coming in the side and discharging out the top. So you want to spray that outside portion of the coil with the cleaner at first. And you can see here the soaps is going on fine. The cleaner is. Of course, be mindful not to spray any electrical components. We don't want any mishaps. Usually there's enough water pressure and the fins are spaced in a way that you can actually spray from the inside toward the outside and get good coverage on that coil. So whichever method you find, you can use, of course, but this is my personal, it's my own unit, so I'm just trying to clean it and do my annual checks on it. So I should have used like a trash bag just to drape over the electrical portions of the service panel area, but I didn't. So you just got to watch it and make sure you don't get everything wet. Now with a little TV magic, we have a 10-minute time delay that has been overridden. So this is a few minutes later, roughly 10 minutes later. And what I'm doing now is rinsing the soap off. I've given it time to sit on the coil to break down any dirt, grease, grime, whatever's there. Maybe some oil residue if there was a leak or something. So we're basically rinsing it off at this point. It's sat on there long enough. And if you notice the way that I try to do it, I try to go from the inside of the coil around the compressor area, and I try to blow backwards through the coil. So this is a top air discharge unit. So the fan sits on the top and draws the air in from the side of the unit. So the side where the air comes in is where the dirt impacts the surface first. Occasionally you'll see me spraying around the lower sides of the unit. That's just to kind of keep the water flowing out, keep the dirt from clogging up around those holes. But we primarily want to spray from the inside out and work that dirt backwards and make sure that we thoroughly clean it. Most of our coils, if I had to be honest, are probably thin enough, a single layer, that it's not so thick as the penetration of the water and the soap is going to be stopped. In some units, you get like commercial units, you would commonly see a double row of a condenser coil or an evaporator coil. Probably more condenser coil, but you would, in some cases, the manual tells you to unbolt the side and basically separate those because the coil is so thick. In my case, I didn't have to do that. A very simple unit to work on. And once I've done rinsing all the soap and residue off of that, I'm going to put the fan back on. So you can see the fan just pops right back on top. A few screws around the sides to hold it in. You want to be careful when you put the fan back on, that you don't pinch any high voltage wires that go to the actual fan motor itself. Mine has a little liquid tight conduit and it's got a little notch. So I made sure that it's properly seated in there and that I'm not going to, damage any wires. So connect the wires back up where they came from. You shouldn't have to take a picture very many times. I know a lot of guys like to take pictures with their phone so they don't get the wires messed up. But as you work on these units more and more, it'll be second nature. So 3 wires for me. 1 goes on the L1, whether it's on the contactor or the common terminal of the capacitor. Same thing. 1 goes on the fan terminal of the capacitor, and the other one is going to be on my defrost board in this case. So we're going to button this up, and what I'm doing now is rinsing out my coil gun. This honestly just something maybe a little weird that I do. I just like to rinse it off on top of the unit when I'm done, partly just to make sure my tools are kind of clean. And what also happens is a little bit of that residue gets on the fan blades. You'll see fan blades in customers that have they're kind of close to water features, wooded areas and things like that. You'll see some dirt build up on the fans. It's probably not going to affect the airflow very much, but since you're cleaning everything else, you might as well clean the fan blades outside. In some cases, I've had to take a rag or a little brush and brush those off. So that's what I'm doing here, and we're pretty much done with the rinsing and the washing. So one time I had a coil gun and I took that little adapter that makes the foaming action happen, and when I was done, I just threw everything in the back of the truck and I snapped that foam attachment off. So I make it a purpose now that when I'm done, since I had to buy another $75 coil gun, I go ahead and take that piece off while I'm rinsing everything, put it inside the coil gun container, put the top back on, and now there's no pieces that are able to snap off. So a little bit of tidying up here, last little spray of the unit, maybe even hit the side of the house if you had some overspray. This detergent is not harmful to my vinyl siding or to the grass or anything, but I don't want to leave it on there. It just kind of looks tacky. So I'm going to spray everything off, hit the siding real quick, get everything down on the ground, make sure that it looks presentable if anybody were to come out behind you. In some cases, the customers will actually be there watching. Make sure you don't spray them with water. And this is pretty much the place where we all started from. We started at the outdoor unit when we first got to the call, and we're pretty much going to end out here. The disconnect is where I try in my personal sequence of operation to finish at. What I'm doing here is what we did inside at the air handler. I'm tightening the disconnect connections, those little terminal lugs. We don't want any loose connections, especially here. I've seen pictures and heard war stories of loose connections that will generate heat, and especially on a vinyl sided house, then you'll start to see some warping on that plastic vinyl siding. God forbid the house catch on fire. So make sure the electrical connections are tight, and once we plug everything back in, the unit's working. So
all right, now once I'm done doing all my readings, cleaning the coils, checking the filter, everything up till now, what I'll do is I'll take all my readings that I wrote down and I'll transfer all that onto an invoice, a receipt, a bill, however you want to put it. I'll make detailed notes about the pressures, the temperatures, the subcooling, the superheat, cleaning the drain line. If I notice that something needs to be addressed, like a dirty blower wheel or a dirty blower motor right there inside by the capacitor, by the actual housing itself, then I'll address that with the customer. By me writing the invoice out, I'll already have a price quote ready on the invoice. I'll have everything annotated. What will be left is for them to want the service at the agreed price, and from then I would then transfer this into more of a service call than a maintenance call. So anything that needs to be addressed other than the regular cleaning would be, like I said, filters. If there's a specialty filter, a thicker media filter, or if If there's a UV bulb that needs to be changed to keep the air being sanitized, I've got 2 sets in mind, so that will be something I would look for. Make sure both bulbs are working. Anything that's extra, like I said, filters, UV lights, if there is a dirty blower wheel, if there's any ductwork tears that you noticed, you can take a quick peek at those and look. Any capacitors, any relays that weren't working, that needs to be addressed. So usually on a typical maintenance, everything goes pretty good. There are minor things to keep the system at peak performance. So you can, like I said, you can address those with the customer, write everything down. Once everything's written down, if there's any work to do, of course do that. That goes without saying. And then you pretty much finalize the invoice, payment due, signatures, and then it's on to the next one. So I hope this helped a little bit. It's a lot of steps, but they go pretty quick. You can do them in any order that you want. This is just my kind of method that I do. If you noticed, I tightened the electrical connections last on the outdoor disconnect. That's where I started. That's where I end. It was working when I first touched it, and it's working as I walk away, leaving nothing left to be done. So it's worked for me pretty good. Make it your own. That's all I can tell you. And be as courteous and customer oriented as you can be. Clean it right. Take the panels off. Get the grass out from underneath the compressor in the fan area. Do all that little stuff because it matters to people and they'll keep calling you back. So hopefully it helps. If you have any questions, comments, let me know. Be glad to help you out best I can.
Don't forget to put the thermostat back to the original setting that the customer had when you go in to get the invoice signed. You don't want to make the house too cold.